Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in every relationship, romantic, platonic, or even professional, when one person forgets the value of the other. They become too comfortable, too careless, and too entitled. They start to believe you will always be there, no matter how little effort they're being taken for granted is a silent erosion of value. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, almost invisible. It begins with the little things: your calls being ignored, your efforts being overlooked, your presence being assumed. What once was appreciated becomes expected. What once brought a smile now barely gets a glance. You offer, you give, you show up, and somewhere along the way, it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like an obligation. The saddest part is that you don't even realize it at first. You think they're just busy or they didn't mean it that way. You excuse the behavior because your love makes you want to believe the best, but the truth is, every overlooked gesture, every dismissed feeling, every ignored word chips away at your value, not your actual worth, but how much of it is recognized by the other person. This erosion is quiet. There's no dramatic moment, no obvious betrayal. It's in the way your messages are seen but not replied to. It's in the way your help is accepted but never thanked. It's in the way your emotional availability is consumed without ever being replenished. And slowly you find yourself running on empty, still giving from a place of love but receiving less and less in return. You start to feel invisible, not because you've disappeared, but because someone has stopped seeing you. And that's the heart of it. Being taken for granted is not about how much you give. It's about how little the other person notices or values what you give. Over time, this imbalance can start to change the way you see yourself. You begin to question if maybe you're expecting too much, if maybe this is just how relationships go. You wonder if your standards are too high, if you're being difficult. But deep down, you know that reciprocity is not a luxury, it's the foundation of respect. You know that love should not feel like a transaction, but neither should it feel like a one-way street. And when someone stops showing up for you in the way you show up for them, the problem isn't your expectations. The problem is their comfort with your sacrifice. The more someone assumes you'll always be there, the more they stop trying. The more effort you give without boundaries, the more invisible your effort becomes. This is the paradox of being dependable. The more consistent you are, the easier it is for someone to believe you'll never stop. And that belief, while flattering in theory, is dangerous when it turns into entitlement. Because love without gratitude, loyalty without recognition, and care without reciprocation are not sustainable. They turn relationships into emotional burdens, leaving one person carrying the weight of two. The erosion of value happens not because you aren't valuable, but because the person on the other side has stopped looking closely. They've stopped remembering the effort behind your gestures, the thought behind your words, the strength it takes to show up even on the days you don't feel like it. They've mistaken your presence for permanence, your consistency for obligation, and your love for something unconditional in the wrong way. And that's when you have to decide not whether you love them, but whether loving them is still loving yourself. Because when being taken for granted becomes the norm, choosing yourself is not selfish, it's survival. The erosion can only continue if you allow it. The moment you see it for what it is and begin to pull back, you interrupt the pattern. You stop the quiet diminishing of your worth and begin the bold reclaiming of your value. Self-respect is your loudest statement. It speaks in silence, in boundaries, in the way you walk away from what no longer serves you without needing to explain. It's not loud in volume, but in presence. You don't have to shout to demand respect when you already give it to yourself. The way you treat yourself sets the tone for how others are allowed to treat you. It's not arrogance. It's not ego. It's a quiet, steady acknowledgement that you are worthy, not because someone else said so, but because you decided to believe it for yourself. When you carry self-respect, it changes the way you react to things. You no longer chase people who walk away. You no longer beg for attention, affection, or validation. You understand that you are not here to convince anyone of your worth. You're here to live it. You stop justifying your standards. You stop apologizing for having needs. You realize that compromising your dignity to maintain someone else's comfort is too high a price to pay. And in that moment, you grow. You shift from needing approval to standing in assurance. That shift, though difficult, is everything. It frees you. Self-respect shows up in the decisions you make when no one is watching. It shows up in what you tolerate, what you allow to continue, and what you finally decide to end. It's not just about saying no to others, it's about saying yes to yourself. It's in choosing your peace over chaos, your mental clarity over constant confusion, your truth over temporary acceptance. When you respect yourself, you realize that protecting your well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary. You stop allowing your boundaries to be flexible for people who wouldn't bend for you. People can feel self-respect when they're in your presence. It's in your posture, in your energy, in how you handle being mistreated, not by lashing out, but by withdrawing what is no longer deserved. You stop entertaining things that disturb your spirit. You stop explaining your worth to those who are committed to misunderstanding it. You no longer stay where you're only half loved, half heard, or half seen. Because you understand that real respect doesn't beg. It doesn't plead. It walks. And walking away from anything that compromises your value is one of the loudest statements you will ever make. You may lose people along the way. That's part of the process. Not everyone will celebrate your self-respect, especially if they benefited from your lack of it. They may call you difficult, cold, or selfish. Let them. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. You were not put here to be easy to swallow or endlessly available. You were put here to be real. And sometimes being real means choosing yourself in a world that constantly asks you to shrink. It means standing firm in your truth even when it makes others uncomfortable. That's the weight self-respect carries, and it's worth it. You don't earn self-respect overnight. It's built moment by moment in the hard decisions, in the quiet exits, in the times you choose not to settle even when it's easier to stay. It grows stronger every time you stand in front of a mirror and choose to love what you see, even with the flaws, even with the scars. Self-respect is not the absence of fear or doubt. It's the decision to keep showing up for yourself even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. In the end, self-respect is the foundation of everything you build. Relationships, careers, boundaries, peace, it all starts with how you see yourself. When you carry self-respect, the world begins to reflect it back. And in that reflection, you find a life that no longer asks you to dim your light to be loved, but instead invites you to stand fully in it. Love is not guaranteed. It is not owed, not automatic, and not something that can be demanded. It cannot be forced into existence by effort alone, nor preserved by sacrifice without reciprocity. Love, at its core, is a choice deliberate, conscious, and fragile. It blooms in freedom, not in obligation. Just because you give love does not mean you will receive it in return. Just because you stay doesn't mean someone else will too. This truth can be painful, especially for those who love deeply, fully, and without reservation. But it is also liberating because once you understand that love is not guaranteed, you stop expecting permanence from temporary people. We grow up with stories that often portray love as destiny, as if two people are bound to each other simply because they feel something powerful. But real love is not sustained by a moment, a feeling, or even history. It is sustained by mutual choice every single day. It survives through consistency, communication, respect, and shared commitment. And when one person stops choosing, the love changes. It begins to slip, not always dramatically, but in small, subtle ways. Responses come slower, affection fades, presence becomes absence, even if the body is still there. That's the nature of love. When it is not cared for, it weakens, it withers, it walks away. This is why no matter how much you love someone, you cannot make them stay. You cannot love someone into loving you back. You can't carry a relationship alone and expect it not to break under the weight. There are people who will take your love and never return it. Not out of cruelty, but because they do not have the capacity to give what you give. And that is not your fault. You are not unworthy because someone else failed to see your value. You are not too much just because someone else had too little to offer. Love that's healthy doesn't make you question your worth. It helps you see it more clearly. The unpredictability of love is what makes it so beautiful and so terrifying. You can give your heart fully and still end up alone. You can be the best version of yourself and still not be enough for someone who doesn't know what they want. Love doesn't follow rules or logic. Sometimes people leave without warning. Sometimes the feelings fade despite effort. Sometimes the timing is wrong, and you have to learn how to let go without losing yourself. You have to learn how to grieve the loss of something you believed in without believing that you failed. Understanding that love is not guaranteed helps you hold it more gently. It reminds you not to take it for granted, not to become complacent when someone gives you their heart. It teaches you to show up fully, to appreciate the present, to speak your love clearly and often. But it also teaches you to protect yourself, to recognize when love has turned into attachment or when care has turned into control. You begin to see that holding on out of fear is not love. Staying silent to keep the peace is not love. Sacrificing yourself to keep someone else happy is not love. Love is not guaranteed, and that's what makes it real. Because when someone chooses you freely over and over without force or fear, you know it is genuine. And when you choose yourself in the absence of that love, when you walk away from those who can't or won't choose you, that too is a form of love, perhaps the most important kind. The love you give to yourself, especially when no one else is offering it, is what sustains you. And it reminds you that while love from others is never guaranteed, your own love always can be. Silence and space are powerful teachers. They speak in the absence of noise, in the pause after the chaos, and in the emptiness that follows when someone is no longer around. In a world that constantly demands reaction, explanation, and immediate response, silence can be unsettling. It makes people uncomfortable. It forces reflection. It demands attention to what has long been ignored. And that is where its power lies, because silence is not the absence of communication. It's often the most profound form of it. It carries meaning that words sometimes fail to convey. It reveals truths that conversation tries to cover. It shows where the cracks are, where the wounds still ache, and where something has shifted beyond repair. Space is similar. It is not just about physical distance, it's about emotional breathing room. It's what happens when someone who always gave suddenly stops, when someone who once responded instantly takes longer to reply. When presence becomes absence, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Space teaches people what they've been taking for granted. It reveals whether connection was real or convenient. In space, true feelings emerge. If someone misses you, they'll notice the void. If they never valued you, they'll fill it with distraction. Either way, space tells the truth. It strips away the illusions that constant closeness can create. It reveals whether someone is drawn to you or simply used to you. People often don't hear you until you stop speaking. They don't see your value until you step away. That's why silence and space are sometimes more effective than confrontation. You can argue, plead, explain over and over, but if someone isn't listening, your words become background noise. When you fall silent, they're left with nothing but their own thoughts. They have to sit with what they did or didn't do. They have to consider the reasons behind your absence. And in that stillness, clarity can finally begin to surface. Sometimes they realize what they've lost. Sometimes they realize they never deserved it. Either way, it's no longer your burden to carry. Silence can be a boundary. It can say, I'm done repeating myself, or I refuse to be misunderstood any longer. It can mean I'm healing or I'm protecting my peace. It's a decision, not a retreat. And while it may be misinterpreted as weakness or indifference, it actually takes more strength to remain silent in the face of hurt than it does to lash out. It requires self-control, emotional maturity, and a deep understanding of your worth. The same is true for space. It's easy to cling to what's familiar, even when it's painful. But choosing to step back to let go instead of holding tighter is an act of courage. It's choosing growth over comfort, truth over illusion. In relationships, silence and space often reveal more than words and closeness ever could. They show who's willing to reach out, who's paying attention, who genuinely cares. They also show who only stayed because you were always there, always available, always giving. When you remove yourself from that equation, the imbalance becomes clear. You begin to see who shows up without being asked, who respects your need for quiet, who doesn't panic in your absence, but instead takes the time to reflect, repair, or reach back with intention. Not everyone will understand your silence. Not everyone will honor your space, but those who do, those who take the time to listen to what you're not saying, who feel your absence and don't just fill it with noise, those are those. Because in silence and space, there is truth. And in truth, there is the power to heal, to grow, and to finally choose what and who deserves your energy. You must value yourself first. Before expecting anyone to see your worth, before asking for love, respect, or loyalty from someone else, you have to give it to yourself. Everything begins with how you see yourself. If you treat your time, energy, and presence as priceless, others will too. If you constantly neglect your own needs, overextend to please others, or tolerate less than you deserve, you silently send a message that your value is negotiable. But it's not. Your value is not defined by someone's ability to recognize it. It is defined by your willingness to protect it, honor it, and stand by it even when others don't. When you don't value yourself, it shows up in small ways that eventually become big problems. You settle for relationships where you are not loved fully. You stay in environments that drain you. You accept behavior that hurts because you're afraid of being alone or rejected. You lower your standards because you're afraid your real ones will scare people away. But what's even scarier is living a life where you constantly shrink yourself just to be tolerated. Choosing yourself might cost people, but not choosing yourself costs your peace. And peace is too expensive to trade for the approval of others. Valuing yourself isn't about being selfish. It's about knowing that you cannot pour from an empty cup. When you prioritize everyone else's needs over your own, you end up exhausted, bitter, and lost. You begin to wonder why no one shows up for you the way you show up for them. But the truth is, people often take their cues from you. If you put yourself last, they'll do the same. If you stay quiet when disrespected, they'll think it's acceptable. The standards you set for how you treat yourself become the blueprint for how others interact with you. This kind of self-value doesn't come from appearance, achievements, or external validation. It comes from an inner knowing that you are enough just as you are. It's in how you speak to yourself when no one else is around. It's in the choices you make that honor your growth instead of sabotaging it for temporary comfort. When you value yourself, you stop begging for crumbs and start expecting consistency. You stop tolerating confusion and start demanding clarity. You stop chasing people who don't care and start attracting those who do. It's not always easy to put yourself first, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to what you do for others, especially if you've learned to equate love with self-sacrifice. But healing begins when you realize that true love, real, lasting love includes you too. You shouldn't have to break yourself to keep someone else whole. You shouldn't have to go unnoticed just to keep the peace. You are not difficult for having needs. You are not selfish for wanting to be seen, respected, and loved in return. Sometimes valuing yourself means walking away. Sometimes it means staying still when every part of you wants to run back to something familiar but harmful. Sometimes it means being alone, not because you're unwanted, but because you refuse to settle. It means learning to enjoy your own company, to find joy in your solitude, and to see your worth without anyone having to confirm it. That's real strength. That's where true confidence comes from, not from being chosen, but from knowing you choose yourself even if no one else did. You must value yourself first because the world will try to convince you to forget your worth. People will test your boundaries, life will challenge your beliefs, and love will sometimes let you down. But if you've built a solid foundation within yourself, if you know within what you are and what you deserve nothing, and no one can shake that. And once you've found that, everything else becomes clearer. You begin to live from a place of purpose, not fear, and you attract what's meant for you, not what you're afraid to lose. Make your absence meaningful. Not out of spite, not to hurt, but to teach. Sometimes the most powerful message you can send isn't in your presence, your words, or your actions, but in your withdrawal. There are moments in life where staying quiet, stepping away, or simply stopping the effort speaks louder than anything you could say. Because when your presence has been taken for granted, your absence becomes your voice. It becomes the echo of all the things they failed to notice while you were there, the space where your effort used to live, and the void left behind when your energy no longer fills the room. People get used to what's consistent. They stop noticing the sun when it shines every day. They stop appreciating the comfort that's always been there. You become background noise in lives that once celebrated your arrival. That's not your fault, it's human nature, but it's also why pulling back is sometimes necessary. Not to punish, but to restore balance, to remind others and sometimes yourself that your presence is not a guarantee. You are not infinite, and your emotional labor is not a bottomless resource. When you remove yourself from situations where you are underappreciated, overlooked, or misunderstood, you allow others to feel the weight of your absence. And that feeling often says more than confrontation ever could. Making your absence meaningful is not about being dramatic, it's about being intentional. It's about choosing to disengage where you are no longer respected. It's choosing to stop over-explaining, stop begging to be seen, stop giving love where it's not returned. It's realizing that the energy you spend trying to be understood could be spent healing, growing, and finding peace. Your silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've cared enough to know when it's time to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It means you're reclaiming the time, space, and emotional effort you once gave freely. When someone gets used to your kindness, your consistency, and your support, they begin to believe it's permanent. They stop matching your energy because they assume you'll always be there, even when they no longer show up for you. Your absence disrupts that illusion. It shifts the dynamic. It forces reflection. It puts the mirror in their hands and lets them see themselves without the comfort of your constant validation. Some people will realize what they've lost. Some won't. Either way, your absence has done its job. It revealed the truth. It also does something powerful for you. It gives you back your power. It reminds you that you don't have to beg for love, attention, or respect. That you don't have to overextend yourself to prove your worth. That stepping away is sometimes the most self-loving act you can take. In that space, you can see things more clearly. You can rebuild your self-respect. You can reconnect with who you are without the noise of trying to be enough for someone else. That space is sacred. It's where healing begins and clarity is born. Your absence should never be empty. Let it be full of purpose. Let it be the space where someone realizes the depth of what they had. Let it be the silence that reminds them what your voice, your presence, and your care truly meant. And most importantly, let it be the moment you chose yourself, not out of pride, but out of peace. Because when you walk away from where you are no longer valued, you make room for the people, places, and experiences that will never require you to go missing in order to be misdeed.